All right, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Awesome. Jeff, when I was doing some research on you, I kept on seeing these words coming up over and over again. This guy was the voice of my childhood over and over again. That's impact. Like, how does that make you feel?
Well, when I started, I stumbled across it myself and I wasn't aware of it for the longest time. I didn't know we had fans for the first two games or so. Nobody told me. I'd just go in, do my recording. At the end of the session, they'd say, "That's it. Thanks a lot." And I'd go, "Thanks." And, 3 years later, they'd call me back in, but I had no idea the game was a big success. So it was really only later that I started hearing this from people. And as you might imagine, it was both eye-opening and rewarding and humbling, because you do a lot of jobs in your life as a performer, and there's no way to figure out which one is going to have impact. You don't know, something that may have been a job that you were really, really proud of can go by unnoticed, and something that you hadn't thought much about, like this, ends up being something that will, I'm sure, be the only epitaph on my tombstone. Well, I'm not going to have a tombstone, but yeah, that would be what it would be. Yeah, it was very
Wow.
impressive.
Okay. So take us back to when you first got the job. What was that process like?
Well, it was like any other job. What happened was I got a call one day from my agent, and she said, "You got an audition at Microsoft," and I'd done a couple of things for them in the past. So it was like, "Okay, great. When is it? Okay, fine. What is it?" "It's for some new game called, I think it's called Halo," is what she said. And I said, "Well, what is that?" And she said, "I don't know. You'll find out when you get there." It was like, "Okay." So no prep. So I drove out, and like it turns out everybody in Seattle auditioned for this gig. Everybody did. It
Mm.
was, as I learned later from Marty O'Donnell, he'd come from Chicago, which had this great collection of actors. It's a huge theater town. They had film and stuff, so they had a lot of good people that he could work from. But he had heard that Seattle comparably had a terrific roster of actors, so he brought a lot of them out. So the way it worked was all the women who came in to read Cortana lines, and all the men read Master Chief. And I remember reading an alien. Um, and then both genders had to end their audition. They didn't want to do it at the beginning because they were afraid they would, um, shoot their wad. They had to pretend that they'd been killed. So you screamed. They wanted you screaming and dying. That was the end of the audition. It was like, okay, sure. And I left thinking nothing more about it because that's the way auditions tend to work. But then first I got a call from my agent. This has been disputed by Marty, but I can't imagine my agent would have called and told me this had it not come from somewhere. And she said, "Congratulations, you've been cast as Master Chief." And I was like, "Oh, okay, again, I don't know what a Master Chief is." We hadn't seen any artwork. All the script we had was just a few lines that we'd been asked to do, like Clint Eastwood, sort of like that. It's like, okay. So after a while, all my friends had gone in to record, but nobody had called me. And I thought, well, this is not good, I suspect. So I called my agent and I said, "Can you find out what's going on?" And she said, "I'm on it." Called back a little while later and said, "Well, there's good news and there's bad news." And I said, "Yeah, the bad news is Marty has decided to go with somebody he has already worked with. He doesn't know you. And so he kind of got cold feet," which he disputes. He said, "We never made an offer." And it's like, that seems unlikely, but okay. She said, but my agent said, "They want you to be the announcer." And I was like, "Okay, great." I mean, I didn't know what that was either. As it turns out, nobody knew what that was. When I went in to record, Marty and I spent the first, I don't know, 20 minutes or so trying to figure out what it was going to sound like.
Hmm.
So it wasn't as if we had any ideas at all going into it. But that's how that all came about.
Oh my goodness. So,
Yeah.
can you describe to the viewers and listeners, like, okay, the Halo announcer job? Can you go into the specifics of what that is? Can you go into that a little bit?
As much as I'm aware, yes, I can. When
Okay.
I went in, nobody told me what it was, and it was so odd because I was saying things like I remember there'd be long lines of things. At one point, there were all these different colored teams, and I was doing all these things like red team, go, blue team, go, yellow team, go, green team, go. And I was just going down lists of, the identical lines, but with different colored teams. And nobody ever explained to me at all what was going on in the game. I would subsequently learn that in a version of the game called the multiplayer version, where you play with other people, because you can play it by yourself or you can play with other people. When you play with other people, you often will hear me shouting things at you as you are playing. So if you get a certain number of kills, you might hear me go double kill, or triple kill, or, you know, killing spree, or any of the things that sort of go along with what you're doing. And evidently, it's like that song that you can't get out of your head. Enough people had heard it over time that, it sort of became a part of the game for them. And but I was completely unaware of that initially. Again, nobody told me how this was going to work. But yeah, that's what the announcer does. He tells you when you're doing well, and he certainly tells you when you're doing poorly.
So,
Um,
Jeff, for the viewers and listeners out there who have never played Halo and they don't understand what's happening right now, for those who are fans of Halo, they're freaking out because they just heard what you just said, the iconic things that came out of your mouth right now. So that's amazing. That it sort of sounds like the story of Star Wars a little bit, where they didn't know what they had at
oh
first,
yeah, oh yeah.
right? And then all of a sudden became this
Yeah.
phenomenon, just like Halo. Like at first it was, yeah, like you didn't know what was going to happen. Then before you know it, freaking trailers for Halo got more views on YouTube than like movie trailers.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Like, why do you think Halo just took off?
Well, it had a lot of things going for it. Back in the day, it's worth remembering. Although, if you look at, if you were in a position to look at uh, um, what the game looked like in 2001,
Hmm.
you'd go, "This was revolutionary." But back then, it was graphically, in terms of the visuals and stuff, it was kind of amazing. And in fact, when I went into record the very first day, and I met Marty, and he took me around and he was showing me what folks were working on, and I got to see like some of the visual stuff, and it was like, holy cow!
Hmm.
The only thing that was comparable back then, video games were two-dimensional. If you played Mario, Mario went from left to right. He just that's what a lot of that stuff was. So now you've got a game that's attempting to take you into a three-dimensional world
Hmm.
that looks more like any three-dimensional world you've seen before. And the other thing that I think somehow is a magic formula, they came up with this avatar for you, Master Chief, who not only looked incredibly cool. I mean, that armor today looks pretty cool, but it also had the advantage of Steve Downes occasionally saying something, and to be able to sort of pretend you were that guy. I mean, when I was a kid, westerns were a big thing. I think it was Warner Brothers had like 8 series on TV, and of course you tried to see them all: Maverick and Cheyenne and Bronco and Sugarfoot and all these different things. And of course the appeal was you sort of felt like you could be Bronco or Maverick or Cheyenne or anything. Same thing was true with Master Chief, in a
Hmm.
way that other protagonists, you didn't necessarily feel like you were that character. You would often observe that character,
Hmm.
going through adventures, but you didn't live it. And I think that made a big difference.
Yeah, the
For-
storytelling aspect, Jeff. That's right. That's that. Yeah.
yeah.
Then ever since Halo appeared, it just you had all these other games that spawned off it that copy that. Maybe not exactly the style, but just the premise of yeah, you are Luke Skywalker. You are going after the Sith. You know that kind of thing. So
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's what occurs to me. Now, somebody else
right,
might say, "Oh, you're crazy. That isn't it at all. It's the furious gameplay. It's,
right,
they keep dropping surprises in the games, There's a very funny thing online that I was watching a couple of months back. I don't know how I stumbled across it, but
right.
it was a bunch of players the first time they encountered the Flood, who are some of the, worst characters in the game. And it's hysterical. I mean, they lose their minds. It's like, what is this? What's going on? It's hysterical. And that gets dropped on people pretty early in the, larger adventure. It's like you didn't see that coming, you know.
For sure. Were you ever a gamer? Like, did you ever play any of these games or?
Well, yes and no.
Right.
I've got two kids. They're not kids anymore. My son turns 40 tomorrow,
Wow.
and my daughter is turning 42 after Christmas. I adore them both, and uh, when they were very young, their parents split up. My wife and I divorced, and so I had them a lot. And as compensation, I, of course, overindulged them,
Right.
which they blamed me for ever since.
Uh-oh.
But I got them game systems. They wanted a Nintendo and a PlayStation. I think those are the ones we had. Now, the problem is that when the game came out, this one, my game that I'm doing, we didn't have an Xbox. And I thought, I can't afford to buy an Xbox. They weren't cheap for an actor who was living, job to job, paycheck to paycheck, trying to
Right.
help raise two kids. Just wasn't going to happen. In fact, I can recall when we had done the first game, the folks at Microsoft gave me a copy, and it was like, thank you. Dot 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 question mark. I said, "Are you going to give me an Xbox too?" And they went, "No." And it's like, well, all right, then I guess this is going to sit on some shelf, prominently displayed. I ended up giving it to my son, thinking, well, he could play with his friends. He later told me that he sold it to his
Uh-oh.
friends for cash, and it's like, you little person, you. Um, anyway, yeah. So, but I did play some Halo. The very first time I played Halo, I was absolutely taken by surprise. I'd been invited to go to supper. I was working at the uh, Utah Shakespeare Festival, and one of the interns there asked if I would like to come and join his family for dinner on Sunday because we were off on Sundays. It's a Mormon state. I said, sure, sounds great. So I went, met his parents, lovely people, his siblings, wonderful kids. We had a lovely meal and a great time talking. And afterwards, he said, hey, like it had just occurred to him, would you like to go play some Halo? I'd never played before, never picked up a controller. I was thinking, sure, I guess. How hard can it be? Well,
Right.
so we went down into their basement and they had like one wall was the screen that, you were playing on, and everybody had their own controller, and we all had beanbag chairs. I think they had like, sparkle twinkle lights around or something. It was this little theater to play Halo. So we get started, and everybody else is like running around and doing stuff, and I'm sort of ambling down a hill, and I'm thinking, well, I should probably try and find some place to go. I don't, so I'm looking around. I get my guy turned around, and there's a building. And I think, well, I bet I'm supposed to go to that building. So I wander over towards the building, but there's a door. And so I'm heading for the door. But as I'm heading for the door, I'm slowly starting to drift to the right of the door where there's a corner. And what ends up happening was I drifted into the corner and then I couldn't get out. So the other players, noticing, that this had happened, just started shooting me until I died. So my first experience of playing the game was of me hearing me say game over. And it was like, I'm never going to play this game again, but I did. I never got any better at it. And part of it is that, I'm sure there will be a way of somehow denoting that point in time when, thumbs, became something you could type with and do on controllers. Mine don't. They're basically from a, primordial time when thumbs just, I don't know what they were meant to do, but they certainly weren't there to work controllers. And I watch kids, typing and stuff, and it's like, how can you do that?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, they just do because that's what they learned. And I don't. So I'm terrible. But yes, I have played some games. And
But
I would watch my kids when they were playing
right.
like Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda and all the games that were popular when they were kids. Yeah.
Right. But come on, Jeff, how trippy was it to hear you on that video game as you were being lit up with bullets?
I was just furious, but because I'd been sort of tricked into this. But well, I mean, it's interesting. This is a thing I gotta say, and I'm sure you'll hear this from other voice actors and people who are performers. A lot of folks do not like to watch themselves on film, and they don't like to hear themselves, and I'm one of those people. I
Yeah.
don't think particularly, I don't listen to myself and go, "Yeah, that sounds great." It's just like, "Oh, really? Is that I thought I was doing so much more," Or if I'm watching myself on a film, it's kind of like, "Oh, come on, Steitzer, do something or do lots less something, whatever." I tend to be a little hypercritical of myself.
Right. But you're an artist, I
Yeah.
understand,
Yeah.
like you want to put out the best possible product. And it's
Yes.
so it's such an inside game because you're in the moment, you're in that recording booth, and you're like, oh, I should have used that intonation. Oh, I should have put more energy in there. I get
I
it,
don't do
but
that. That's not
you
the
got a
way it
lot of
works.
fans, Jeff, man. So I think you did just fine.
Absolutely, but I got to tell you, that's not the way I work in a booth. I mean, basically, when you come to record, it's not like I've thought it out because I generally don't have the lines before I go into the booth. So it's not like I've had a chance to prepare at all. So you
It's a
just
cold read. Wow.
it's a cold read, and that's all. I mean, and it's pages of cold reading. And every once in a while, I'll have to stop and say, how do you pronounce this? Or what does this mean? When I encountered the line zombie killing spree, I had to say, wait a minute. So there are zombies in the game? And they were like, uh-huh. And I said, well, can you tell me more about that? And they were like, no. And it was like, okay, moving on. And it basically, the way we would record was every line or phrase or whatever I had to record, I did 3 times in a row. So it might be double kill, double kill, double kill, like that. And then I would go to the next line, triple kill, triple kill, whatever, all the way down the line. And you get through a certain section, and then the writer would say, okay, Jeff, can we go back to line 6? Might be kill atrocity. Can you give me 3 more? Maybe a little bit faster on that. That would be all the direction I would get, and I go, okay. I never had any idea what of the hundreds of things we would record in a session were going to get used in the game,
Wow.
or where. Nobody told me that. And so it was really flying blind. But what you do in any recording situation where you've got somebody who's kind of directing you, in this case, it was the writer or the engineer would say, Jeff, could you back off the microphone a little bit? Because, our ears are bleeding. Um, that kind of stuff. So, you've got people telling you, giving you some response. Basically, my feeling was if they say, great, let's move on, they had what they wanted.
Right.
So, because I knew so little about how it was going to be used or where or whatever, I was just reliant on them. It's like they seem pleased. Okay. And I always said, at the end of a session, say, is that everything you need? You need anything else? I'm happy to do more. And more often than not, they go, we got it. And it's like,
Wow.
I believe you. And I go my merry way.
Wow. So, okay, viewers, listeners, doing cold reads ain't easy. So, for Jeff to go in that booth and to knock these out, It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. So when you get that script, like I'm assuming they'll allow you to do like numerous takes. You're talking about numerous takes. Like you're gonna flub some lines because this is cold stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So do you ever have like a confidence? Like I don't know, like say you flub like 3 lines in a row. Oh, like does your confidence do you lose it at all, or you just keep going, just keep moving on?
Just keep going, just keep going. No, I don't. First of all, if you have got the job, then that's already kind of a vote of confidence. If you've been doing it for any length of time, then there's got to be a certain amount of, you know, feeling that like I can do this. I mean, sure, there's always a little bit of nerves when you walk in. There might be new people sitting in the room that you haven't met before, and you think, okay, new people watching you do what you're doing, listening to what you're doing, but you just go, I got the job. You know,
That's right.
if somebody else could do it better, they'd be standing here and I'd be sitting at home, reading a
Right.
book or running
Did
around on YouTube or
did you
something.
get a cold read at the audition, or did you have sides
Yeah.
like
No,
the
it was
night
cold read.
before?
No, I didn't have any signs. It was
Okay,
absolutely cold.
interesting because like I've had auditions before for like acting roles and stuff. You get the sides the night before.
At least
Yeah,
generally
so
you do.
why is
That
it
is
different? Why do you get a cold read for a voiceover gig?
well, for this particular voiceover gig, it was, and this is interesting because sometimes I'll get an audition from my agents in New York, and they'll be, you have to agree that you won't be able to talk about the audition. You may even have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. In this instance, because this was a big deal new game that they did not want people to know
Mm,
what was going on in the game, right? They were not letting it out at all. It's like you hear stories about people who are engaged to do a Marvel film or a Star Wars film, and they only get like a teeny little scene. They have no idea who they're talking to. They have no idea what the story is that's going on around them. You don't get anything, often. And that's because part of the fun, I guess, and the excitement is
yeah,
getting to encounter it the first time. Nobody likes spoilers. So
that's right.
the last thing they want is you running around telling us like, ooh, ooh, and guess what? There are zombies in this game. So it's like I couldn't talk about that stuff.
Got it. So we've talked about auditions, we've talked about jobs, we've talked about agents. Okay, so say someone's listening or watching this conversation here, and they're like, you know what? I want to do voiceover gigs. I want to do voiceovers for a video game. So what's the process? You mentioned agent. How do you get an agent? Like, how do you build up to that point?
Well, this is not going to be helpful, and it's going to
Okay.
make me sound like a dick. But basically, all the agents I've had have approached me. So
Right.
what happened was I had gone out. I was running a theater in Seattle. I was the artistic director. I got a phone call from a casting person in town who I knew. Lovely, lovely lady. Jody Rothfield is her name. And she wanted me to audition for a TV movie. And I was like, sure, I'll do that. And so I went out and then I got a call back. And I was sitting at the call back and I looked down the hallway and there was an actor coming towards me, a guy named Kevin Ty, who'd like done all these things. He plays the dad of the guy was formerly in the wheelchair and Lost, who I think ended up pushing him out the window, which is how he got crippled in the first place. I mean, he's a wonderful actor. He's in all the John Sayles movies like Mate One and Eight Men Out and things like that. Great actor. Walking down the hall while I thought hallway, and I thought, oh, that's it. I'm not getting this part. I knew he was coming down to read for the same thing, and indeed he did get it, and that makes perfect sense. But at that audition, the casting person said, "Do you have an agent?" And I said, "Yeah, no, I don't. I'm thinking about getting one. I thought I maybe should." And she said, "Well, who are you thinking of?" And I mentioned a well-known agent in town. I said my ex-wife had been with this woman, and she said, "Well, yes, I'm sure they'd be glad to have you. But you might also want to consider there's a new agent in town. Her agency is smaller. It's kind of a boutique agency. You might get more attention." And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I'll give that some thought. And the way I work, it's kind of like that means I'm going to think for like months, and eventually I may remember that, like, oh, right, I was going to think about that. What can I actually do? Next morning, 9 a.m., I'm in bed. because I stay up late and I get up late, or I certainly did then. And the phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and it's this agent. And she says, I understand you're looking for an agent. I'd love to represent you. And I went,
Wow.
okay, uh, great. And that's what it was. She said, "Do you mind?" She said, "Well, can you come in on Monday?" This was a Friday. Can you come in on Monday so we can meet? And it was like, sure. She says, in the meantime, do you mind if I send you out for a job today? Northern Exposure, the TV show,
Yeah.
had an audition. She said, I want to send you out. And it was like, okay. I didn't have a photo. I didn't have a resume because, I'd been running a theater and directing. And so I was
Mm.
just completely ill prepared. Same thing happened in New York when I moved there. A friend of mine said, do you have an agent when I was heading to New York? And I went, no, I'm sure I'll see if I can't find one. He said, well, I'll be happy to, put out the word. And it was like, yeah, whatever. And then I get a phone call from an agent that I knew saying, I want to represent you. And it was like, okay. So, I mean, yeah, I know it's really horrible. I don't talk about it that much. I've been very, very lucky, but here's what I would say. This may be a takeaway. And that is from the very beginning, from when I started doing jobs, I was in a theater company when I first moved to Seattle called The Empty Space. And there were people, producers of commercials, who would come and see us who loved our work because we were wild. And we played lots of wild characters and stuff. And there was one guy in particular who did not like voiceover people because they sounded a certain way, and he liked actors. So he hired us to do voiceovers. Those were my first voiceover gigs. And then the engineer that he worked with and I got along very well, and the engineer would start recommending me to people. So for probably the first decade, I just got work from being recommended for work. And then, it sort of, and I never said no. So, to here, it's two things. It is take whatever you're offered, don't say no if you can possibly avoid, unless you're asked to, do some awful commercial for kidnapping people or something. But it's like, just keep moving forward, say yes as much as you can, and then bring your A game, whatever that may be. You talked earlier about reading cold. It's like, yeah, I do have thankfully, a facility for being able to pick up a piece of paper and I can just, read down the page without ever having seen it and make a certain amount of sense of it. I'm very lucky that way. That is a skill you can acquire and one that you should try to develop because the more prepared you are when opportunity comes knocking, the more likely you are to succeed. And the more you succeed, the more you will pique people's interest. As a director, many of my jobs came from I heard about this show or I saw this thing you did. And, I want to, and I have more or less not been out of work in almost 50 years.
Oh my God.
And
It's amazing.
that's the only reason.
You know what? I think I'll add a few more
Sure,
observations, tips that from your story. The
sure.
theater, you made your own stuff. You put
Yeah,
yourself out there so that people can see you. Number
yeah.
two, the network, right? Like people saw you, they wanted to get to know you. Those people know other people that know there's jobs and agents available over there. It's no coincidence. It's not luck, my friend. You put yourself in those situations because you took initiative, you know?
Well, but yes, but I also there was a great deal of luck. Do you know what I mean? For instance, when I came to Seattle, it was on a whim. A friend had said, "Come visit me," and I was like, oh, "Okay." I was going to go to Minneapolis because I'd gone to college there for a couple of years back in the turbulent late '60s, early '70s, and had too much fun. Then I moved to Iowa, finished my college there, ended up being in college for what seems like a decade, wasn't, but it was a long time. And this friend had moved to Seattle and said, "Come visit me." And I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And then I'll move to Minneapolis and work there. Shortly before I was to take off, I was driving out to visit. She said, um, "Do you want me to set up an audition for you?" And I was like, "I guess I'm going to have to do it sooner or later." And I got an audition for this company I mentioned. The artistic director saw me, and then it was an ensemble, and they all had to vet me and agree that I could be invited into the ensemble. So I did another audition a week after the first one, and they voted and they said, well, yeah, we want you to join the company. Boom, I was off and running. None of that was planned. I was just, you know, available when the opportunity arose. And I think a lot of people, it's weird because I've always hated improvisation. I mean, I adore it. I love watching people improvise. I'm the kind of crazy anal person who is like, I need to know my lines. I need to know what I'm doing. But in fact, I don't think that's how, you necessarily build a successful career. You got to be ready to go, oh, we need you. Here's a good example. Some years ago, I had been contracted to do the first production of a musical called Something Rotten that was, hopefully going to head to Broadway. And so it was going to premiere at the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle, and I was playing a little teeny tiny part. And there were a lot of really cool Broadway people that were already attached to it, like Christian Borle and Brian Darcy James and John Cariana and, Beth Level, all these amazing people. So they flew me and two other Seattleites to New York to do a lab, which was this month-long rehearsal period where basically they mounted the show without sets or costumes or lights or special effects. And then they did a series of performances for potential investors, for influencers, stuff like that. The show those did so well, they decided not to go to Seattle. And they also decided not to keep the Seattle actors. So suddenly, from having a job where I was going to be making like $12,000 because it was going to be a long rehearsal period in Seattle, a long run, I suddenly had nothing. And, it's like, well, that's not good. So one day I was during this period, I was starting to go, well, should I be worried? And I had gone out to do I was on my way, literally driving out early in the morning to one of the airfields. I was supposed to be shooting all day for an industrial. I was going to be some passenger in a plane. And I get a phone call from a friend of mine in Arizona, and he says, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm on my way down to shoot this thing. Can you fly down here today? And I said, no, I can't. Why? He said, well, there was a play they were doing, and one of the actors had a family incident. They had to go home. They wanted me to come down and do a couple of performances on book. I said, well, I could probably come tomorrow. And he said, great, I'll set it up. Next day, I flew to Phoenix, Arizona, and from there no, we stopped in Phoenix. They could have flown me to Tucson, which is where the rehearsal was happening, but it was faster to have somebody meet me in Phoenix and drive me there. So I'm like, I haven't slept. They drive me down. I start rehearsals. I'm doing this show. I'm going to be there for at least a week, maybe a week or two, as I recall. And I thought, well, I can go ahead and memorize this. I don't want to carry a script. So I memorized a 90-minute play in 3 days.
Wow.
And I had like the largest line load. It was about 5 of the American presidents meeting, at the funeral of Richard Nixon. So, and I was playing Gerald Ford. Don't look anything like him, don't sound like him, but I had to do it in a pinch. Well, then it turned out the actor who had gone home for the family wasn't coming back. So they said, can you finish the run here in Arizona? And I went, sure. And then they said, well, can you come to Milwaukee? It was a co-production and do it there. And I said, I guess so. And then while I was in Arizona, I got a call to audition for a new version of Kiss Me Kate that was happening at the Hartford stage in Connecticut. And I knew the director, and I sent an audition, and they cast me there. So suddenly, from no work, I suddenly had a year's worth of work almost. Wow. And it was just because those things popped up, and I went, why not? Sure. Yes. That's exactly how it happened.
Oh my
Isn't that wild?
goodness.
But I mean, again, I think it's
Yeah.
just to a certain extent, yes, every time you do a show,
Yeah.
you try and do the best you possibly can. That's not always easy, but you try, you try to be reliable. You try to be that. I'll give you another example of something that was a piece of advice I got very early on, and I learned my lesson. I was in a reboot on TV of The Fugitive, the movie with Tommy Lee Jones and Harrison Ford.
Yep.
Well, they decided to do a reboot of the old television show with David Jansen, but it was going to star Tim Daly and Michael T. Williamson. Halfway through the season, they tried to develop this other family life for Gerard, Lieutenant Gerard, Michael T's character, wasn't working. Nobody was interested. They just jettisoned the family and gave him his team like he had in the movie. And they hired me to be one of the team. And again, that was just me going in for an audition and a casting person saying, "What if you parted your hair like way over?" I had more hair than I do now. And I went, "Sure." And it was like, I think that got me the job. Again, how lucky was that? So I go in to do the job, and we're doing a scene, and the rest of the company, one of them is Kate Walsh, who later went on to do
Yeah.
Grey's Anatomy and Private Practice.
Wow.
Lovely lady. A guy who'd been one of the leads in 90210, and Anthony Quinn's son. And we were doing a scene, and Anthony Quinn's son, Francisco, just couldn't get his lines. That happens sometimes. It's like you cannot remember his lines. The director was started yelling at him, which of course always helps. And it took like 16 takes to get this one little sequence. He was so frazzled by the end, he couldn't have remembered his name or his
Wow.
parentage or anything. And after it was over, the next episode, when we were all, going to come in as a team, we no longer had that character. He
Wow.
never came back. And I thought, this is a lesson. Don't waste time, because time is money. And it's not a question of, he wasn't actively doing it. He was a great, great guy, very talented man. He went on to do other things and then tragically died way too young. But it's like, do your job, be ready to go. There's a wonderful interview with Bill Nye, that wonderful actor. He always comes with his lines learned for any play that he's doing. And a lot of people frown on that, but he's going, that's my job, and you can't get anything done until you know your lines. So know your lines. Don't waste time.
Right.
Get the work done. And if you become that person who's known for doing the job and doing it well, that will often breed work down the road.
Got it. Do you have any
Long-winded
tips on how to
answer.
memorize?
Well, I'll tell you how I used to do it. I would take a little 5x7 note card, and you got a script, and you've got your lines, and you've got the other person's lines, or the other people's lines. And so I'd start at the top of the page, and if it was my line, I would say my line, I check, yeah, got that right. I'd move on down. I do my next line, check, yeah, I got that right, move on down, because I'd look down the page and then I go through them and stuff. And when I messed up, I go to the top of the page and start over again. So it's just
Oh,
sweat works. It's boring. It's tedious. Eventually, I also needed to think about what I was saying and how it was a response to the other actors. But you don't know until you encounter the other actor what you're going to be responding to.
mm,
You can't make up your mind about that until that person says the line the way they're going to say it. And you go, oh, never even occurred to me that they were going to be saying that with a smile. I thought they'd be yelling it. So you've got to respond in an appropriate way.
it's interesting, Jeff, whether it's live action or like voiceover work, animation, whatever, choices are being made by the actor. You know,
Absolutely.
like you're just
Absolutely.
talking about the interplay between you and the other actor. It comes down to facial expressions, tone of voice, mannerisms, all that.
But you know what? Here's this is my belief. You can't be thinking about that stuff. You can't be thinking about, raising an eyebrow. I'm sure a lot of actors do. I think I did in fact, I was another lesson learned. I was in a show and I had little to do except sit around and like respond to things. And I remember like thinking about how I was going to respond and like, so I wouldn't be boring and stuff. And maybe this time I'd kind of do this and all that stuff. And I thought, I'm exhausted at the end of the evening because I've been working so hard at doing stuff that was ridiculous. And I thought, or maybe I should just listen like I would in real life and let whatever comes out come out. Got a lot easier after that because that's all we're trying to do is give the appearance of doing what you would expect to see in real life.
Authenticity. Yep.
Yeah, that's all.
All right. So, Jeff, you talked a little bit about it, just the scarcity of work at times as an actor, bouncing from one gig to the next. Talk about that life. You were fortunate, you're right. you've had steady work, but there were times where, like you had, bills to pay and maybe the gig wasn't there. Talk about, like, for the person, the viewer, listener that wants to embark on this journey, whether it's voice acting, live action acting, talk about that reality of things.
Well, it's okay. Again, I can tell you what it was like for me, and
Okay.
it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. When I was young and got excited about theater, first of all, I was doing theater in junior high and then in high school, and everybody could be in the play. So you'd have huge shows with large choruses. The entire choir would be in the musical. There'd be like 30 kids on stage. But it wasn't like that was only happening in schools, because I'd go to the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, which was my local regional theater. I was in Iowa. It was 4 hours away, but it was the closest big regional theater. And I would go and see shows there, and I would see shows with casts of anywhere from, 30, 35 people. One show there had a cast of over 50 people. Nobody has that now. A big play is 8 people. And more often than not, I was looking at, I've done some things in Chicago. In fact, one of the things I did there was I directed a show at the Goodman Theater, which is the big theater in Chicago, with a cast of, like, I think it was close to 30 people. It was the
Oh,
American premiere of a British play called Red Noses. Now, I was looking at some of the different theaters that I was familiar with, and one of them was doing a show, was doing a season with 4 shows instead of 6. And a couple of those shows were one-person shows. They were two-person shows. The big show was like 6 people. Another theater that used to do at least 3 shows was down to 2. And again, it was a one-person show and a small cast. That's the reality of what's going on now. It had been, the theater had been in a certain amount of trouble prior to the pandemic, but that certainly did not help matters at all.
mm,
So that's made everything tougher. Now, as far as acting is concerned, you act wherever you can. The reality is, if you're living in a town where there are more opportunities, there will be more competition, but there are also more opportunities. In Seattle, I was very aware of the fact that if you were an equity actor, that was a union actor, um, you know, there were only so many opportunities for you, and you might only get 2 or 3 chances in a year to audition. How can you have a career only being able to do 2 or 3 auditions? That's not even getting the job, that's
yeah.
getting seen.
Yeah.
Well, what I did in my day was I very quickly became a director. I'd always wanted to be a director. And I mentioned that when I joined the Empty Space. I said, I want to be a director. It's like, all right. And by the end of the first year, they needed to fill a slot, and I had a show, and they said, okay, we'll vote. Okay, you can be our director. And I just kept going. And so then I, was asked to teach at the University of Washington as a guest lecturer,
Nice.
which meant I came in for a class, and I did that a few times, um, and taught other places. And I started doing voiceover, and I started doing industrials, and I started doing whatever I could to keep going. So when I say that I haven't been out of work except for 3 weeks, really, you
Wow.
know, that's the reality. That's true. But the time is different now because there are fewer and fewer opportunities. Theaters are closing all over the country. Theaters that were well known, that had long, illustrious histories are gone. And a lot of the theaters that remain have very few opportunities. I mean,
Right.
I look locally, and it's like there's not a lot out there for anybody,
So what
and a lot of
happened? Streaming? Is this what happened that killed the
yeah,
theater?
I mean, I think a lot of it is here's what happened with theater as far as I'm concerned. First of
Yeah.
all, a lot of people forgot that, we are doing this for an audience. And they started doing it for themselves and each other, for their other, their friends and stuff, their other professionals, to impress them. Because that's how they thought, you got ahead, and everybody started looking towards trying to get to New York or one of the bigger metropolises from the smaller cities and stuff. And,
Mm.
so there were times when you'd go to a show and it's like there's nobody local in the show. I don't know why they're doing this play. Who could possibly, this is nothing their audience is going to be interested in.
Mm.
So, I have a little formula that I have been, shouting into the void about for a long time. And basically it is, if you're, not getting audiences at your theater, ask yourself 3 questions. That is, are you doing plays that your audience, not any audience, but your audience, the one that's been with you, has any reason to want to go and see? Because a lot of times we forget that and we think, ooh, here's that new play, and the audience is going to be completely unprepared for it. They've never seen anything quite like that, which doesn't mean they shouldn't, but then you have to know that going in and say, well, this is a little off the beaten track, but it's like what we do in this way. So you find yourself, however many plays you can afford to do, 4, 5, 6, used to be 6, then you do it as well as you possibly can. Because more and more theaters, to save money, are shrinking the size of the amount of time for rehearsal. So you used to get maybe 3.5 weeks. Now you've got 2.5 weeks. And it's like, well, the show isn't going to be as good. So, then finally you have to ask yourself, how much are we charging for tickets?
Mm.
And in Seattle now, there are theaters that are just a cut above community theater that are charging 70, 80, 90 bucks for a ticket
Wow.
to go see a play their audiences have no interest in, badly done. What do you think the problem is?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you can sit at home, see the latest movies a month after they've opened in a theater. You're paying way too much money. When a rental is now 20 bucks or something, it's like, oh, there are films that I might sit down and watch for 6 bucks, but I'm certainly not going to watch them for that. But a lot of people will. It's like, I've got a
Right.
friend who, has seen all the most recent films. It's like, well, how did you see that? Oh, it was on TV. I paid the, 30 bucks or whatever they charged me for it. It's like, okay, I won't do that very often. Every once in a while I go, I've got to see that, and I will. But I mean,
Right.
that's still a lot cheaper than going to the theater, and you're going to see big, name talent, people you love. You get to see them working in things. It may just be something frivolous and action packed, and, it'll take your mind off the world, whatever.
Sure.
You know, there are other streaming services for channels where you can attend concerts. You can watch operas at the Metropolitan Opera that way,
Mm.
or other opera companies around the world. You can see theater from the National Theater. You don't have to leave your house to get a lot of those experiences. What you don't get is the experience of being with an audience. And I think we're forgetting what that's like, you know?
Absolutely. There's no doubt this has been the era of disruption in very many industries. And of course, entertainment's really felt the brunt. It's interesting, like how, like, okay, let's talk about in terms of the disruption, excuse me, just in terms of work, voiceover work. Will AI take over the jobs here? Like, it's doing everything
Um,
else here. Like,
it will take over some jobs.
yeah,
Absolutely, it already has. I mean, you'll find yourself on the line with something or listening to a commercial and you're going, that's AI. I mean,
yeah,
that's the problem with AI right now is that it's AI. You're
right,
not persuaded that it is something else. But look at CGI. When CGI first came out, a lot of it was kind of like, uh, yeah,
yeah,
no, that's not, they're not really in that situation, that car. You look at a big
yeah,
film that had like thousands of people fighting, and you go, that's like 12 people, and they're just redoing them. It's like, look, that guy's the same as that. It
right,
was really, really terrible. They got better. They got a lot better.
yeah,
I remember I was watching, oh, it must have been Shang-Chi. And there's
yeah,
a big fight in the bus. And I went, how the hell did they do this? Well, they didn't. It's none of it's real. And you're going, but it looks so real. All this stuff in the bus. It looks like they're in a bus. And it's not like the old days in a Hitchcock film where you'd see like a backdrop behind the people.
right,
And, well, it's obviously rear projection, and
yeah,
that's what it used to look like often in cars. And now it's like they never left the lot.
yeah.
They never left wherever they were shooting. It's
Jeff,
insane.
my favorite CGI story. I don't know if you've ever seen like the behind the scenes of the movie Jurassic Park, Originally, the dinosaurs were supposed to be like animatronic, like Star
Yeah,
Wars,
some of them still are. Yes.
right? And so the Star Wars guy, I think it was the Star Wars guy who was going to work on the Jurassic Park shoot, and he's doing his dinosaur things, and all of a sudden, the Industrial Light and Magic, I think the special effects guys, they're like,
Yeah.
"Hey, check out this raptor we're making, running in one spot," and apparently the animatronic guy Spielberg and the producers are all in the same room to see this little bit of footage, like a computer dinosaur looking authentic, just running. And then the animatronic guy goes, "I think I just got extinct." Yeah.
Wow.
So that's my
Absolutely.
favorite story about the changing of the guard. Like,
Think
right?
about it. I mean, it's like even when you think about just Pixar movies and all the stuff, it's like now they are every bit as expressive and even more 3D than a lot of the old, hand drawn animated films. It all moves so quickly.
Yeah.
So the answer is yeah, AI will take over a lot of work. Um, I still think that, you know, the other big change in the industry is that so much work is now going to celebrities, which used not to be the case. If people are going to do commercials, they go do it in foreign countries. And those are popping up now. It's like, oh, look, William Shatner or Sean Connery is doing a commercial in another country, but they wouldn't show it in the United States because they didn't want to impact their potential as film stars. Well, that's no longer the case. Now everybody is doing everything. Famous actors are doing audiobooks that used to be, done by journeyman actor, wonderful actors, but they weren't celebrities. I've got a half dozen good friends who have been, done 500, 700,000 audiobooks, and they're going, yeah, it's really dried up
Yeah.
because Meryl Streep is doing them, you know, Tom Hanks is doing them. And it's like, well, it's kind of hard to compete with that. And it's another selling point for the book. Of course they're going
Right.
to go down that road. Same thing with celebrity commercials. Half the time, you might be hard pressed to know exactly who you were listening to. You might think that sounds familiar. Who is that? Gene Hackman? Is that Gene Hackman? Yeah, it is. And in
Mm.
those instances, I think a lot of that is the people who are paying for the commercials just love the idea of being in a room with Gene Hackman. It's
Oh,
like, yes, I worked with Gene Hackman today. Nobody thinks like I worked with Jeff Steitzer today. It's like, sorry,
come on.
not
Yeah,
the same
yeah, they
gig.
do.
Nah, it's not. It
Come
isn't.
on.
But so that's happening as well. So everything is conspiring to make our jobs more difficult, which means you have to be as good as you can be, as prepared as you can be. You train. I'm still taking webinars on how to do work. Absolutely.
Good. Good for you.
I've got a home studio that I cobbled together myself because as a voice actor, you have to, because nobody's going. When I started out, I would get a call to go to one of the recording studios in Seattle. And I'd drive down, I'd park my car. I never knew how much change to put in. But I could be here for 15 minutes. I could be here for an hour, depending on whether they're on schedule. I'd walk in, I'd check in, I'd go to a little holding area where all these other people, all my friends were sitting and waiting to audition for the same commercial, and we'd be chit-chatting about this, that, and they go, Jeff, and I go, okay, and I go into the booth, and the engineer would tell me what I wanted, and I go ahead and I'd read it once, maybe twice, and they'd say, okay, we got it, thanks. It's like, anything else? Nope, that'll do it. And I'll leave, and you might never hear again, or you might get the job. But that's what you did. You didn't
Yeah.
have to be an engineer. You didn't have to be a producer of
Yeah.
your own stuff. And now you do. You not only have to have a studio, you've got to know how to record your own stuff so it is studio ready. It's got to be good. And you
Yeah.
learn that. You have to learn that. So that's
Well,
what you
yeah, this is also the age of the creator economy, right? Where you have YouTubers creating their own stuff. You have,
sure.
what? Like in the old days, I'm sure you know all of this stuff. How movie studios would fund movies, finance movies. Now it's incumbent on you, Jeff, to like fund your own movie, create it, get the actors, all that. Then you go to Netflix and pitch them, hey, we got this polished product. Do you want it? So things have changed. You're right.
A lot. It's and it for old people like me, it's horrifying. It's like, oh, in my day, we would never have had to do that. For young people, it's exhilarating. And those people who are of a naturally entrepreneurial mindset, and I know a number of those people, I'm just dazzled by, the kinds of things they do. I've got a friend whose son had a band with some friends of his, and then was it the band members or some other friends of his got together and they started putting together a web series, and they got noticed by Comedy Central, and they've been, back and forth trying to get stuff set up in LA, and they live in
Wow.
Chicago. And
Beautiful.
it's like, look at you go. I'm so impressed. And of course, this friend's son, my friend and I are both like, do you need any old character guys? Because web series, we'll do anything. I've done web series. I've done a couple,
Yeah.
and audition for others. And it's like, that's what you do.
Yeah.
You just, everything changes. Nothing is permanent.
Yeah.
That's just true.
Hmm.
So a part of me is always going to mourn the world that I grew up in, where I could see the greatest plays ever written, done really well with ensembles of 35 people, nights at the theater I will never forget.
Mm.
I lived through that incredible period during the 70s when it seemed like every week there was some new masterpiece coming out by Coppola or Robert Altman or John Sayles or Woody Allen or whoever it might be. There was so much stuff going on. There is now, but there's just so much stuff. It's hard sometimes to see the trees for that forest, but there's stuff everywhere. Sometimes you have to go look for it, and wonderful stuff.
Hmm.
So you just have to keep looking for it. It certainly helps if you want to do animation, you want to do games. It's probably better to be in New York or LA because that's where,
Mm.
a lot of that work is happening. Um, you know, you've got to make a choice. What's more important, what I do work wise with my life or how I live my life? I've got a
Right.
lot of friends who might have had bigger careers if they'd been willing to travel more to jobs, but they weren't. They wanted to stay at home. They wanted to tend their garden. They wanted to have their kids. They just wouldn't do it. I've been on the road all my life. I
Mm.
liked it. It was fun. It was an adventure, you know.
Right.
But there are times when I think, yeah, I wish I'd stayed home more, you know. Because now,
Sacrifice. Yeah.
yeah, and you look at your life and you sort of go, it's been amazing,
Yeah.
but I never think about the shows I've done. I never
Yeah.
think about, the commercials I've recorded.
Hmm.
I don't think about that. I think about
Right.
my kids. I think about my friends. I think about those experiences. I think those are the ones that you really want to nurture. And you can always do a play. I mean, it depends.
Hmm.
If you're looking for a career, that's one thing. If you just have the urge to do a play, every town has a community theater or a bunch of people who want to do a play, put on a
Yeah.
show, make a movie. People can do it with their phones. You can do it, you know. You just have to really, really want to,
Yeah.
you know.
You know what? You know what, Jeff? Like, I think you're a shining example of like just going out there and, doing things as opposed to just wishing and praying and sitting on the couch eating a sandwich, right? So
Oh, I
good
do
on
that.
you, man.
I do plenty of sitting on the couch and eating a sandwich. Um, Actually, a sandwich would be one of the more healthy things that I would eat, as opposed to the popcorn and the chocolate and all that garbage. But
Right.
you know what it is? I think I have a lot of friends who I think were every bit, if not more talented than I am. I've got my ex-wife was to my way of thinking, an extraordinary actress. They all quit. A lot of these people and my ex-wife, they all got out of it, and it's because they could not stand the rejection. They could not stand the insecurity. You've got to be willing to hear no a lot and not take it personally, you know? You just do. One
Hmm.
of the things I love to do, and I've done this since I was a kid, when I was just getting interested in, I'd always been interested in the movies, of course, and TV because I watched tons of it and I love to read and all that kind of stuff. But I discovered at a certain point when I was able to graduate from the children's library, which for us was down in the basement, and then you went upstairs when you got your big boy, your big boy library card. There were all these memoirs by actors talking about their lives, and I inhaled them. I never stopped reading them. Just today I was trying to decide, do I really need to read Cher's new autobiography? And I'm thinking, kind of think maybe I do. I mean, just ridiculous. But one of the things that reading about people who've gone before you and their journey is, not only do you get to have a sense of what the history of your profession has been, which I happen to think is important, but you get to see when other changes happen. Think about those silent film stars. I'm a huge fan of silent film. And then one day it was gone, right? Think about those people who were doing movies in studios. And then one day television was there and those studio films were gone. We've seen it happen over and over and over again. And I just read Al Pacino's memoir, Sonny Boy, and he's got a great attitude. He says at a certain point, he kept sort of doing what a lot of people thought was stupid. He kept going back to do theater because he loved the stage. He just loved it much more than movie making because it was all him. He was in control and he could express himself, and nobody was like taking a different take than he thought was his better take and using it in the film. And but there was a period of time when everything dried up for him, and he sort of went, oh, and then he got old, and then it came back. And now he's older, and everything is kind of like, the jobs are fewer and farther between because you're old. I mean, you can't be in your 80s and expect necessarily to be starring in everything. You've got to be willing to go, well, I'm going to be supporting now. And if you've been a leading actor all your life or actress, to suddenly go, I guess, think about, who is it? Oh God, wonderful actress, and I can't think of her name right now. Mary Astor. Mary Astor was a femme fatale for many, many years. She's Bridget O'Shaughnessy in The Maltese Falcon. She's the love interest in The Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart. And then at a certain age, suddenly, Mary Astor was playing mothers. She was in Meet Me in St. Louis, and she was playing the mom. Yep, Myrna Loy, same thing. Sultry, saucy. She was one half of the Thin Man couple, Nick and Nora Charles. And then one day, she was the mom in Best Years of Our Lives. And, at a certain point, you sort of just have to go with it. I'm very well aware it's like, yeah, my whatever thoughts I might have had, and there weren't many, of, being a big movie star, it's like, that's not going to happen, which is fine. I like having some time in my hands, but it's like, you've got to decide what you want and then go look for it,
And
you
I
know?
love, Jeff, how you just carved it out. You carved out a niche for yourself.
Yeah. Well, again, it was like, a lot of that was done for me. Jen Taylor, who's Cortana in our game, very smart young woman. And we get together all the time. We were at a convention a couple of weeks ago in Columbus, and she was talking about, somebody referred to our game as iconic, and she said, no, 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 no. You, the fans, made the game iconic. That's nothing we did. We just did our work. You made it iconic. Same thing with the career to a certain extent. I tried to be ready to have my career, but it was other people who went, him. That's right, him. I was lucky enough to get an audition for Mary Poppins on Broadway. And
Yeah.
I remember going to the callback, and there were like five of us. And one of the guys was a guy I recognized as having been he was a Broadway legend. And he had been like in the original production of Follies by Stephen Sondheim. And he had done all these incredible things. He had just been in the film Enchanted, all the old people dancing in Central Park. He was one of them. Harvey Evans was his name. Sadly, he's since passed on. And I thought, oh, there's no way I'm going to get it. And I did. And it's kind of like, whoa. And all I could think of was like, Harvey Evans has done all this stuff and it doesn't matter. Somebody else looked and said, it's Jeff this time.
Yeah.
Another time, it wasn't. Many other times, it wasn't, you know? So it's like other people are making a lot of decisions for you. It's not in your control all the time. The things that are in your control, that's what you focus on. Are you ready to go? You can control that. Are you good at sight reading and cold reading? You can control that by just practicing. Memorizing lines, try it. There was a great British actress, Sybil Thorndike. Every morning at breakfast, she would memorize one of Shakespeare's sonnets to keep her brain sharp. You
Wow.
can do that. You know, are you in bad shape? Get in good shape. So when the call comes, you know, what skills don't you have that you could pick up? Do you play a piano? Learn to play a piano. Can you play a guitar? You might need to. Think about people who've had to play a guitar in a movie. Keith Carradine won an Oscar because he could play a guitar and wrote I'm Easy, which ended up in Nashville. He won an Oscar for best song. It's like, be ready to go. That's all.
I love
You
it.
gotta love it. You gotta love it.
I love it. Great advice, Jeff.
Obviously, I love it. I really loved so much of what I've done with my life. I've made so many of my very closest, dearest friends. They're people I've acted with or directed, and they're still there for me today, you know?
Amazing, Jeff. Man, what a conversation that this has been. Like the stories, the career, the moments you've had, the lives you've impacted. It's just you, in my opinion, Jeff, you're far too modest about your accomplishments, but they've been powerful on a lot of people. And just go online, viewers, listeners, go online, Google this guy's name, and you'll see the legions of fans this guy has and how he has impacted their lives. And I get a kick out of going on Jeff's Cameo and seeing all the different, like the Cameo page where he records messages for fans. It's hilarious, man. He does all his Halo lines and whatnot, and fans go berserk. It's awesome. Like Jeff, you've had a great career, and it's continuing. So congratulations, and thank you
Thank
for
you
just
so much.
sharing your time today.
Of course, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. As you can tell, I hate to talk and I hate to talk about myself. I learned this a long time ago. I was doing Inherit the Wind on Broadway. Oh, are you going to drop some names now, Jeff? Yes, with Christopher Plummer and Brian Dennehy. And what I discovered is that every actor loves to talk about themselves. And because I love to hear what actors have to say, all I had to do was go to Chris Plummer and say, what was it like working with Elia Kazan, the great director, which he did in the play JB? Oh, he was wonderful. It was marvelous. And, we all love to talk about ourselves. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to bloviate at length. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Awesome.
Take care. Have a good day, man.
Jeff, what an amazing career you've had so far. Thank you so much for being on the show, sharing your wisdom, your insight, the behind the scenes of what it's like to be voicing video games in the first place. So thanks again, man. Like all your Halo fans out there, they're probably buzzing. They're freaking out right now because they just heard from the gaming icon himself. So Jeff, thanks again. I appreciate it. All right, that's it for this interview. Please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast for more great content. Until next time, take care and have a good one.